Welcome to the Revolve Recap Weekly Podcast, where we help the members of Revolve Church deepen their connection to God, His family, His mission, and just keep you in the loop of all things at Revolve. Like always, I'm your guest, or I'm your host. See, I have a different person in the co-host seat, and it's screwing me up. But I'm David McCumber, your host, and this is my co-host, not Bill Lackey. Who are you?
I'm Josh Mercado.
Josh Mercado. He is the darker, more handsome, and stronger Bill Lackey, and he actually can grow a beard, so it's looking good. Looking good. So Josh, we're gonna bring him on, and we're gonna interview him a little bit. But Josh has been coming to Revolve for a little bit, and has a really cool thing happening over here at No Limits Academy. And so, why don't you just introduce yourself? Just take a minute or two. Who are you? A little bit of your background, and then we'll get in deeper. But just so people know who you are.
Yep. So my name is Josh, and I am the founder and president of No Limits Academy. And before that, I am a retired, or I should say, I don't know if I say retired, but resigned from teaching. I spent 11 years in public school teaching psychology and sociology before I felt the calling to quit and start this journey that is No Limits Academy. Mm-hmm. And it's been an experience. It's been a lot of hard work, but through that process, felt that God was working, and that ultimately led me to Revolve, and that's the super short version.
That's great. That's great. So what we do is every week we start with a question, kind of a fun question. But one of the things that Bill and I do whenever we travel, and we bring someone along with us to travel, which I would love to see Josh come. Bill's over here. I'm going to reference him sometimes, but I would love to bring Josh on a trip. I think that'd be a blast. So, but this is the question we ask people when we travel. If you could have a movie prop from any movie that you could just hang up on your wall, put on a man, like you can't say like the Millennium Falcon, it's got to this is a piece that you're hanging on your wall, you're putting on the mantle, it's in your house, that when people come in, they go, what is that? Is that the lights? Everyone says the lightsaber, but what is your movie prop?
So any movie, a prop from any movie. I'll be honest, I don't even know if this counts, but I think I would.
And don't think it has to be like the Passion of the Christ, just because this is a church podcast. You could say, if it's like Scarface's Uzi or something, that's okay.
I got to say it. If you can walk into my office and see the Rocky Balboa statue, I think that would be, I think that's it, man.
If you have really tall ceilings in your house, you could put that.
I think the Rocky Balboa statue.
All right.
That does it for me.
Okay. So obviously, because it's a boxing thing, but is there something particular about that, or is it just?
Yeah. So I grew up playing traditional sports: basketball, baseball, football, and really every sport that involved being a kid. And for whatever the reason, the movie, when I watched it as a young kid, it appealed to me.
Okay.
And people would ask me when I first started boxing, over 20 years ago, they would ask me, why did I start boxing? And I would tell them because of Rocky Balboa.
Yeah. And
people would ask me who my favorite fighter was, even when I was an active competitor, and I would say Rocky Balboa. I just loved his story.
Yeah.
It was captivating. And still to this day, if I watch a Rocky montage, I'm ready to conquer the world.
Yeah.
So yeah, Rocky.
Yeah, it really is. Sylvester Stallone did and he's a great writer.
Yeah.
The story of Rocky Balboa is amazing. So.
Yep. He's on my.
And it's kind of what we all want. We want to be that underdog that overcomes, and yeah.
Yeah, and I loved it so much that when I was teaching U.S. history, I found an awesome way to sort of teach the American Revolution through the eyes of Rocky Balboa.
Oh, that's cool.
Because Rocky Balboa, of course, was the patriot, the underdog, home turf in Philadelphia, fighting against Apollo, the greatest fighter in the world, where the British were the greatest army in the world.
Yeah.
He had the best facilities. He was highly trained, highly qualified. Rocky, again, was the ragtag militia. So So I found a way to bring Rocky into every area of my life, trust me.
That's cool. So that's our movie prop. I think my movie prop was the helmet from Backdraft, the dad's helmet, who passes away, that kind of inspires both boys to become firemen. I don't remember what Bill's was. It's definitely something that I made fun of. I think it was a Star Wars thing or Indiana Jones thing or Indiana Jones thing, maybe the whip or something. I don't know. But all right, so tell us a little bit, Josh, about. I know this is probably a longer story, but how did you come to faith? You've been coming to Revolve for a little bit, and I know your journey of faith has been for a while, but it was a little bit more concrete this summer. We had talked in the past, but
so
give us a little bit about your testimony.
While I was in public school and when I first started teaching, I really wanted to save every kid and just be part of the dynamic world of education in every sort of facet, coaching and helping with fundraising and just mentoring. And I just really thought that I would live the rest of my life as a teacher, and I absolutely loved it. And over the years, things changed dramatically in public school, and I started to find myself changing myself, and I was losing this sort of fire that motivated me so early on. And many of my colleagues would say that is just sort of a part of the process, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, every person starts a career and they're gung-ho and they're super passionate, and over time that sort of sizzles out. But I'm not wired that way. Mm-hmm. And I thought that, I never wanted to be that person as far as a teacher who just sort of, who didn't have the fire anymore.
Yeah.
So I knew that it was time for me to move on, because I thought that, I was doing a disservice to the kids if I wasn't, fully invested. And, before I was a teacher, I was a boxer in college, and that really sort of helped fill gaps in my life, and had incredible coaches that also helped fill gaps in my life. And I quickly realized that at the time, my higher power, my higher power brought boxing and education to me.
Yeah.
And it really sort of helped me find value in myself and find my purpose or my gift, which was helping kids. Mm-hmm. And over time, this opportunity presented itself to start No Limits Academy, which is a boxing and youth development center. And I had all these incredible relationships from the past that ultimately helped take this dream and make it a reality. And while I was connecting those dots, I realized this is beyond coincidence.
Yeah.
And again, that's part of a longer story. But the short version is, I realized that something was moving me here, and what we were doing here was bigger than me.
Yeah.
And I thought I kind of figured it out. I thought it was okay if you just stay positive.
Yeah.
And if you think positive, you can bring positive things. Mm-hmm. And I thought that was sort of it. And I was humbled about 2.5 years into the project, because from the outside, the community really sort of rallied behind this idea that we were transforming kids, mm-hmm. and we were changing kids, and we were giving kids a real fighting chance. And I was the one who was going to bed every night feeling like I was failing.
Yeah.
Because I knew the information that no one else knew, right? I mean, It's easy to take a picture and post it on social media and say, look at all the great work we're doing.
Yeah.
And those pictures, they can convince you, right?
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, I was going to bed at night, and I knew that I was failing. And it was really one particular situation with one particular kid that really was just sort of a punch in the gut. And I had this great theory that if kids could fear a coach, and just fear someone, all things being equal, the father, right? Mm-hmm. Their biological father, that would be enough to sort of, all things being equal, guide that kid and keep him focused and on track. And I always ask, well, what happens when the kid doesn't have a father?
Yeah.
Like, who fills that gap? And I thought we were doing a real disservice for those types of kids. So my theory was, that's where I can step in, mm-hmm. put that fear in them, respectful fear, but ultimately that would keep them from steering in the wrong direction. Mm-hmm. And it was really up until July where I held this theory where, hey, listen, rule with an iron fist. Don't be afraid to put your foot in a kid's butt, and, mm-hmm. and ultimately, because your heart's in the right place, this kid's gonna really prosper under your watch. And I failed miserably, and I realized that I failed miserably the day before I was going on a trip to Bozeman, Montana for a spiritual conference that I didn't really know too much about, but I just knew that it was an opportunity for me to try something different. And I guess in hindsight, it was the spirit that was pulling me on that plane, because a Puerto Rican going to Bozeman, Montana in the middle of July is just not on my top, 10 things to do.
Yeah.
But something compelled me to do it.
Yeah.
And once I was there, things started to connect. And it was an incredible conference. And one by one, there were speakers every speaker was out of an episode of TED Talk. Mm-hmm. Not just saying it because he's here, but I think, Pastor Bill would have fit right in, because they were electric and engaging. Mm-hmm. And I realized quickly the day after I failed miserably, believing that I could change a kid.
Yeah.
I realized that God put me on a journey to put me in Bozeman the day after I came to that conclusion.
Yeah.
And at that point, I was saved on that trip, because again, I was always a believer, but I took a back door to God.
Yeah.
And it wasn't through Christ. And at that point I realized, whoa. And then it was like, to be honest, it was like the end of a movie, like an M. Night Shyamalan movie, right? Where everything's just sort of connected.
Yeah.
And it was at that point where I realized, whoa,
yeah,
this is so much bigger than me. And now it became, okay, great. I had this incredible experience in Bozeman, but if there was a good church in Cape May County, I would know about it. Mm-hmm. And I just didn't know. And I was nervous that I wasn't going to find something when I got back home to sort of keep that flame going. Yeah. And little by little, as we sort of explored different places, my friend Adam Dunning, who's a great friend of mine from Cape May Tech, stayed on me and kept inviting me to church. And that's super intimidating. As Pastor Bill says, anybody will go to a Bible study. Yeah. But not everyone's willing to go to church. Yeah. So that was intimidating. And then once I went, I just fell in love with Pastor Bill and his message. And he and I started to connect, and before you know it, he was on site at No Limits Academy, and now Pastor Bill's here 3 days a week, and filling that crucial piece that I'm just not qualified. I just don't have the information. So not only is he helping me as a leader in my spiritual journey, but most importantly, he's planting seeds of faith and Christianity to our kids, which is incredibly important. And it's the way, the only way. And again, I feel confident saying that, considering that I've tried every other way. Yeah. And it just doesn't work. Yeah.
Well, that's great. That's really good. I think you answered almost every question that we had in your summary of your testimony, which was great. But it says in John, and we talk about this in a lot of our discipleship training, that the Father draws, and he draws us to himself. And I think you can see over the years, we'll say a lot of times, God's kind of pulling the threads, and he's pulling it all together. And I think, you've seen in the last, year of God pulling it all together and really seeing this all come together. So that's cool.
In one of the classes in Bozeman, it was the title of the class was called Trials and Suffering. And it was all about these traumatic experiences that people have. And although they're horrible, what's the message? Yeah. Because according to the speaker, the devil's real, but God can crush the devil. Yeah. So nothing gets through without God's filtering. Yeah. And when I would look back at my life and not having a father and how bad that hurt. Yeah. Well, fast forward, we do our best work with little boys who don't have daddies. And I say to my dad, who I've since forgiven wholeheartedly because he was going through his own journey. Yeah. And now, although he was never a father to me, he's now a grandfather to my son.
Wow.
And that's a beautiful thing. And love my relationship with my father now. But I will say to him and to my mother, if my father was there, I wouldn't have had the work ethic. I wouldn't have had the motivation to have the vision to start No Limits. So when kids are in my office and they're talking about not having their father and how bad that hurts, I can say, well, I know how that feels like. Yeah. But ultimately, as we teach them the importance of surrounding themselves with strong men and being a good kingdom man, I try to also plant the idea that at some point you're going to have your moment with your father where you're going to forgive, because that's incredibly important too.
Yeah. Yeah. So tell us a little bit, man, I feel like this podcast could go for like 2 hours with all this. But tell us a little bit. So when did No Limits Academy, when did that come on your mind? I mean, it really seems it makes sense based off your passion to develop, young people, to be a teacher, your love of boxing. Like, it really seems like a no-brainer. But when did that kind of come from where it was in your brain, to where it is now is a big jump.
So when I was training and making the transition from amateur boxing to professional boxing, my cousin wanted me to train in a facility that could really sort of nurture my ability. So he built me a private gym in his basement, and we would train in this basement. And we call it the first No Limits Academy, because there was a ring. I mean, it was really a special place. And in order to make money, because at the time it was right after the recession in 2007, 2008. There wasn't a whole lot of teaching jobs, so there was no opportunity for me to find employment. And in the meantime, my cousin encouraged me that when I wasn't training, I should do personal training, one-on-one boxing training. And I started, and through that process, I met a kid who, even the way I met this kid was divine intervention, but I meet this kid who apparently is going to the Naval Academy. So I meet him, and he's like, hey, I need boxing lessons. I'm going to the Naval Academy. And I say to him, well, listen, this is a funny story. I was a college boxer, and I won a national championship. And because of that journey, I've boxed at every major military institution in the country, including the Naval Academy 3 times, West Point 8 times, the Air Force Academy in Colorado Springs a few times. And I says, and not for nothing, I know it's Cape May County, and people might not understand this, but going to the Naval Academy is a huge deal. And he says, yeah, I guess, in the most humble of ways, right? So I say to him, but listen, I got a funnier story, because I went to Lock Haven and we just won a team national championship, and then I won an individual title in 2007. And you can go on the NCBA and you'll look and you'll see from 1960, it's Air Force Academy, Air Force Academy, Air Force Academy, West Point, the Naval Academy, and these are all major military. But then you look at 2007 and you see Lock Haven. And then you see West Point, UNLV, West Point. We didn't belong there. And I say that to say, I told Dave, because this was a few years after, I said, listen, the guy that started the program at Lock Haven, Jimmy McNally, he founded the program in like 1970 something. He's now the head coach of the Naval Academy. And he's been the head coach. He ended up being the head coach for 40 plus years, and he just recently retired. Now I said that to say, I know him personally. He's an alumni of Lock Haven, and I beat a kid for the national championship in 2007, and Jimmy McNally was the coach. So even though he was upset that his Naval Academy boxer lost, he was happy that a Lock Haven boy won. So I just told Dave, hey, listen, I'm going to give him a heads up that you're on your way, that you're going. And then Dave ends up going there and having a great career and really doing great things. And in that process of getting to know Dave, we would talk about starting something called No Limits Academy. And the idea was it was going to be bigger than a boxing gym. And it was going to be more than a boxing gym. And we didn't know it at the time, but God was working his magic. And Dave and I kept this story. And by the way, my boxing nickname as a professional was Josh No Limits Mercado. So that's where the No Limits sort of came from.
Cool. I didn't know that.
And sure enough, Dave goes and it's probably a decade has gone by. We remained close friends. And one day I remember, I just felt something inside of me that said, it's time, man. Like it was, a decade after we talked about it. And I called him. He was in the West Coast. And I said, hey, Dave, I think I'm ready. And he's like, ready for what? I said, to do it. And he's like, do what? And I was having these conversations in my head without sharing them. I was like, no limits, man. He goes, I have no idea what you're talking about. He goes, No Limits Academy, I think I'm ready to start the boxing gym. My education is in my rear view, my educational career. Like it's time. And we always had the attitude if we were going to do it, we were going to do it right. And sure enough, we made it happen. And before you know it, it evolved into this. And it was a lot of hard work, a lot of blood, sweat, and tears, so to speak. But when I talk to Dave now, we know that God was working this entire time. And I laugh to him because he always feels guilty because he's been helping from a distance. He was in West Coast and now he's in Philadelphia. And he always feels guilty. And I say, well, listen, the only contribution you've given to No Limits Academy has been leading me to Christ. So I think that's pretty okay.
Yeah.
So,
Wow.
So yeah, and he was the one, so I'm forever indebted to him and really his entire family.
Well, I think, and as an outsider who knows really nothing about boxing except for watching Rocky, like you envision, and I'm going to say, 99% of people envision a boxing gym or is it a gym, academy boxing is like a dingy, no lights, just kind of like a rundown thing in like a bad neighborhood. And, if you follow No Limits Academy on or Instagram or have seen pictures, this facility is incredible. Like we're sitting in this room right now that has, these super nice tables, and there's a kitchen for the kids to eat. And I hope we can get a little bit more into that before this podcast is over. But then even the facilities, the boxing facilities, comparatively, and I know you're a humble guy, you don't want to brag, but is this a pretty nice gym comparatively to a typical boxing gym?
I think that, you're right. You don't want to brag, right? Humility is huge, but because I know that it was God that was working, now I feel a little bit more confident to say this is the nicest boxing facility in probably the Northeast. Yeah, really, and we don't have a whole lot of competition because, as you mentioned, most gyms are like that. Yeah, but that was God working His magic. Yeah, it was the vision that. That boxing could really change a kid's life, and through my psychological journey and research, I've uncovered, I really immersed myself in the developing brain and brain plasticity and the fact that we can turbocharge our minds. And I think there's a lot of things that we're doing or not doing that really could help kids. And I say that to say boxing done the right way is incredibly safe. Yeah, and I also know that I'm able through boxing to reach the most amount of kids because. You can swing a baseball bat 150 times and not be able to hit a fastball. Yeah. Or you can shoot 100 jump shots a day and not be Steph Curry. Yeah. And not be 6'10". Yeah. I think God gave me boxing to reach the most kids because it's the most applicable to all kids. Yeah. I have kids here that want to become the best boxer in the state. The majority of our kids, get cut from every sports team they've ever tried out for. Yeah. But they're here because their confidence is low and they want to build that confidence. Yeah. A lot of our young boys are hitting 13, 14 and they're starting to find that they're attracted to the opposite sex and they want to feel confident when they go to the beach and take their shirts off. Yeah. Some kids are literally getting bullied and they want to stand up and we encourage kids to do things the right way, but ultimately we can check a lot of boxes. So when you think of the amount of kids that are in the facility, that, again, is God working on the back end because as a young kid, I really thought I was going to go to the major leagues. Yeah. I thought I was going to go to the NBA. Little did I know there wasn't a market for a 5'8" Puerto Rican guy. But I think that, my relentless prayer that I would give at night to, at the time, my higher power up in the sky was please, make me a professional athlete. Please, please, please. Little did I know God was going to find the only sport in the world where I could be a professional athlete, which is one that had weight classes. Yeah. So in hindsight, again, it was all. Now I'm just trying to stay out of his way. Yeah, and that's where Pastor Bill comes in because he helps me. So over the last few months, I know that Bill and some other folks from Revolve have gotten involved in No Limits. Maybe we could bring Bill on and we'll swap out, and you guys can kind of talk through. What God's been doing here. I know he shared a lot of things with me and some of the elders, but I think it'd be cool for the church to hear some of the ways that God's been working here during the week. So, Bill, we'll switch out. We'll take a quick break, and then, Bill, we can switch out and finish this conversation. So, awesome. Thank you.
All right. Well, we're back. Time for the real conversation, you know what I'm saying?
Oh, boy.
So, so it's really neat hearing your story, and I know your story's got a lot more parts of it that are exciting to share, but why don't you tell people, maybe share a story or two, people can really relate to stories, as we always say, about how you feel like God's been working at No Limits, and feel free to change the names of the kids, that kind of stuff, but how do you feel like, what are some of those stories that you've seen in the last 6 months where you're like, whoa, this is clearly God's on the move in this kid's life or through this situation, whatever it might be?
So there's a whole lot of stories, but I think the one that I'm thinking about now It involves a kid who came to us 3 years ago. We've been here for 3 years. We worked hard to fly under the radar, Pastor, because we wanted to ensure that our product remained our product. And when you're starting a nonprofit and you're reliant on funding, you can easily be distracted on what the mission is. And the mission was to turn boys to men. And one of those kids has been with us from the beginning. And he has, his background is that his father pretty much, just disregarded him a long time ago. And he's a boy who, it's not that the father's been gone for so long and he's used to it. I think he wakes up every day wanting his dad back. Mm-hmm. And his dad is just not there, and you can feel that gap. And it's been a couple of years now. He came to us when he was about 10, and now he's 13. And I would say it was about a year ago where I started to recognize when he would get in the ring and spar, which for those who don't know, sparring is when it's sort of like a scrimmage in boxing, when you get in the ring and you're not necessarily going 100%, but you're going hard enough where you can learn and just sort of sharpen your skills. And the kid was in the ring, and we realized that he sort of had this submissive nature to his boxing. The best way for me to sort of articulate it is, imagine a dog that's been abused, physically abused, and then you go to pet the dog, and the dog flinches. Yeah. That was the sort of behavior that I was observing just from body language. He would find himself, this kid, he would find himself buried in the corner. And he just looked like someone that was just abused, who was super submissive. And in boxing, the one place you don't want to be is in the corner. And the coaches are screaming at him and yelling at him, telling him to get out of the corner, because it's just not a good place to be from a strategic standpoint. But my take was slightly different, because I know God blessed me to see things a little different, because I didn't just see him making a bad boxing decision. I saw it as something deeper. And I decided that I was going to make it one of our objectives to keep this kid out of the corner. Whenever he was in the corner, I was going to blow the whistle and get him out, because I knew it was deeper. Yeah. And it had to do with confidence, which ultimately stemmed from not having his father around. And sure enough, we broke him out of this horrible, horrible habit. Not just boxing habit, but ultimately we knew that it was deeper. Yeah. And turns out his mother gives me a call and tells me that his father found out he was boxing. He thought that was awesome. So randomly called him and picked him up and took him away to Bridgeton for the weekend, and made him fist fight one of the kids in the projects. And I would equate that to like dog fighting, right? And he bare knuckled some other kid, and apparently he got demolished. He got beat up pretty good, and he lost all confidence. And his father sort of yelled at him and screamed at him. And it's just a horrible, horrible situation. So now this kid comes back to us, and we built his confidence. He finally got reconnected with his father, and then his father does that. And sure enough, all confidence is gone. And so we spend the next couple of months building him back up. And sure enough, it leads us to this day that ultimately, in hindsight, I know God was working, because the gym was packed. There was probably over 100 kids in the gym, and he's back in the ring. And he's buried himself in a corner, and all the coaches are screaming once again to get out of the corner. And I stop what I'm doing, and I'm doing 100 things, but for whatever the reason, the timing, God's timing for me, and I have ADD, Pastor, you know that. I have serious attention issues. So with all the things I'm doing and the dynamic, there's a wild dynamic here when the gym's full, as you can imagine. Yeah. But for whatever the reason, God just sort of woke me up to lead me to look in that ring. And sure enough, I see this kid buried in the corner again, and the round buzzer sounds, the bell, ding, ding. That means it's over. And every kid is conditioned that when the bell rings, it's over, it's done, you stop. And for whatever the reason, I jumped up on the canvas and I said, "You're not done, keep going." So I basically just vetoed the timer and said, "You're not done, keep going." And sure enough, he's in the ring, and he's getting, at this point, pounded on. When I say pounded on in boxing, he's safe. His hands are up. He's got his headgear on. He's just not performing to the best of his ability. And now the buzzer sounds again about 30 seconds later. And now everyone thinks that they're done. And I jump on the canvas again and I say, "You're not done, keep going." And I'm being pretty aggressive at this point. Yeah. And I don't know what I'm doing. All I know is something's going on inside of me, and I'm just saying, you're not done, keep going. And sure enough, he goes for another 2 minutes, and that's the length of the round. Then the buzzer sounds, and clearly it's time to take a break. But I say, you're not done, keep going. And at this point, my coaches are looking at me like I'm crazy.
Right.
Because at this point, it's sort of like that fine line between,
Yeah.
are you pushing, what are you trying to accomplish here? And again, they don't know what I'm thinking. They don't know that the Spirit is working in me, because I don't even know that the Spirit is working in me. All I know is something's compelling me to not let this go.
Yeah.
And it's beyond just being a crazy coach who wants to win.
Right.
So sure enough, the bell rings again. I say, you're not done, keep going. And at this point, I think the coaches were going to intervene and say, Ricardo, slow down.
Josh, you're done.
You're over.
Right.
So the bell rings again, and then I scream again, you're not done, keep going. And he looks at me and says, he didn't even buy me a Christmas present. And he just lost it, and he cried. And at that point, he's on our shoulders, and we're holding him and kissing him and hugging him and loving him and just telling him know that it's okay. But that's how God works here.
Yeah.
And I don't know what compelled me to do that. I know that if I was hired at any public school in the country, I would be fired.
Yeah.
And probably a hot topic on The View.
Right.
But ultimately, I just know that God was working.
Yeah.
And that's what it ended with.
It just goes to show you that, when we think about, just think about when you're lifting or any of those kinds of things, if you're swinging a hammer, framing houses, like your hands develop calluses, and the same thing happens to our hearts and to our emotions, to our souls. We get these traumatic experiences and we get these calluses, and the reality is, just like anything else, it's like you need to push through the callus so you can actually have that impact. And I think that's one of the things that's so interesting from my observation about what you're doing here. For the first time I came, you said, you got to exhaust the body so you can relax the mind. And it's that same kind of idea. It's like a lot of these kids are from rough homes, rough backgrounds. They have so many things. And it's like, you have to push past that. Either that's with physically draining them or those kinds of ideas. Because if you're just in a school environment where you're getting yelled at, it's like the kids are masters at flipping that switch and just tuning it out. There needs to be more than that. And it really goes to show you, like you said, that the environments that we have at our regular public schools, and they're not designed to effectively minister to these kids, reach these kids, shape these kids, mold these kids. And so, man, what a powerful story that really is.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, there are some administrators, even within the county, that understand that.
Yeah.
That are literally, their backs against the wall and they're saying, what else can we do for this kid? So we have these relationships now with public schools, because public schools say, we can't effectively do what we need to do because of legislature, because of the rent, because of whatever.
Right.
And they're recognizing the need to align themselves with organizations like No Limits who aren't publicly funded.
Right.
And it allows us to do what's most important. And what truly is most important, beyond the workouts, beyond the intense conditioning, is Bible study.
Yeah.
Because ultimately, if we can plant a seed of belief in their hearts,
yeah,
they have a shot.
So to give you guys an idea of what we do is, the kids are here Monday through Friday. On Mondays, Tuesdays, and Thursdays, they do like a conditioning workout. And we give, at the beginning of that workout, we give the kids a chew on this, like a chew on this question. And that could be anything, just to get them to start thinking. It could be something as simple as, what do you want to be when you grow up? Or, what's something that you hope to, see change in the next year in your life? It could be anything. It's not necessarily, spiritual. But then after the workout, once they are more drained, then we tie that chew on this question into scripture, and it helps us to kind of build that bridge. And then on Thursday nights, we just started having an actual Discovery Bible study. That's like an open invitation. Now the kids don't all have to come. They're all there for the chew on this, but for the Bible study, we say, hey, if anybody wants to come, that's available. And last week we had 26 kids. When I say kids, I'm talking ages probably, what would you say, 13 to 24?
13 to 24, yeah.
Yeah, about that. And so, that's pretty wild. But it goes to show you that these kids, you'd think, oh, these kids aren't interested in spiritual things. But what would you say? Do these kids seem hungry for spiritual things, in your opinion?
Yeah, it's the same kid who doesn't pay attention in class, who's probably seen as a major class disruption, a behavioral problem. Those are the same kids that are engaging and answering the questions here. So I think there's something that's internal.
Yeah.
It's just sort of, they know that there's something going on internally that's leading them to asking these questions.
Wow. I'm struck by, there was a kid who was here, probably the youngest kid in the room last Thursday. And, we were waiting for like some photocopies or something like that. I think we were waiting for Josh to come up, and I don't even know if you were in the room when this happened, but I said to the kids, hey, why did you decide to come today versus not coming and just working out? And the one youngest kid raised his hand, and I gotta be aware, I'm like smacking the table and everything. He was wow. The one youngest kid raised his hand, and he said, I don't believe in God, but I want to learn more so at least I can make an educated decision, or something like that.
Yeah.
And I thought, man, what 12-year-old is self-aware to make those kinds of comments? I mean, that's a pretty remarkable thing to say.
Well, what's really remarkable is when I think back at that particular kid, his uncle was my brother's best friend.
His uncle
his
was
uncle,
your brother's best friend. Got it.
So I knew his grandmother.
Wow.
And his grandmother, like we say often with the kids, a lot of the times it's not that they don't believe in God, it's just that they had a bad presenter, bad representer. And that kid's grandma was pretty intense. And she sort of
Scared everybody away.
Scared the father away, right? And the brothers.
Yeah.
Now, as a result, grandmama's, now grandson has this sort of, I don't know.
Yeah.
So it was really cool to see.
That's
He
interesting.
was open, and again, it just goes back to our job because it's complicated. You don't know what you're doing when you have 80 or 100 kids in front of you. We have to identify that common ground where we can just sort of respectfully, patiently, right, just sort of welcome them up the steps, literally up the steps to Bible study. And that has to be done strategically.
Yeah, I mean, because you can't force this stuff down people's throat, and I think that's one of the things that I would want you guys to know, anybody who's listening, that you throw these questions out there. Faith has been a part of No Limits, like it's a core value from the beginning. So it's not like that's hidden. It's not a bait and switch. Like you come in, you see the big banner, it has faith in the middle. And I would say a lot of these kids come from what I would call, correct me if you disagree, I think that they have because of their family and demographic backgrounds, they have like a cultural understanding of faith. It's like, yes, there's a God, but like you said earlier, it's kind of like a higher power. He's like the big guy in the sky. You know what I mean? Like, yeah, you pray when you get cancer, you're in a bind.
He's a genie.
Yeah, he's a genie. It's like you got to rub the lamp in the right way, and that kind of idea, exactly. But they've never heard. I mean, a couple weeks ago, we talked about sin and how sin is missing the mark and how it's like trying to jump across the Grand Canyon. And I felt like however many kids were in the room at that night, it was like they were all engaged. And you really say, these kids have, maybe some of them have grown up in church or they've grown up in Christian homes, but I would say that most of them have never heard the gospel clearly articulated. Yeah. As in like, Jesus died for your sins, he was buried, he was resurrected. I don't think that's clear. It's more like American Christianity, if I put it that way.
And it makes sense because you don't say God in school.
Right.
You don't. I mean, it's a social studies teacher can get away with it a little bit, right?
Because it's part of society.
History. But that's even in the context. It just doesn't. You're not planting seeds.
Yeah.
So they're hearing things for the first time, and what they've gathered is sort of like the end of a movie. There's a God, and then they're just well, what happened? In the first 20 minutes. So that's what we're sort of trying to do here, right? Just connect those dots.
That's good. All right, let me ask this question. So, if you could think 1 year out, 2 years out, 3 years out, what's your hope or vision for No Limits?
So, what we try to be here is when we say we are a boxing and youth development center, the boxing is incredibly important because of the science behind exhausting the body, relaxing the mind.
Yeah.
Kids, and one thing I really want to emphasize, Pastor, is we don't just help kids from disadvantaged backgrounds. We help all kids.
Yeah.
Because we do believe that every kid, no matter what your socioeconomic background is, you can use some help. We have kids that come from some of the most horrific circumstances you can imagine, and we have rich kids who have great parents.
Right.
Right. So youth development aspect is incredibly important to us because we know that we can help all kids.
Right.
So this facility has really emerged into the sort of ultimate after-school experience, sort of a one-stop hub of all things, not just boxing.
So tell us some of the things that happen on a regular week.
So kids can come in as early as 3 o'clock, even though we don't start till 5:15. Kids can come in right after school. Some kids, literally their buses will drop them off in front of our facility. And they come up, they can have their snacks, do their homework, hang out in the teen center, which is equipped with air hockey and bubble soccer and all kind of different games.
Right.
They can have an open gym, so they can play or participate in open gym. They can play basketball and just sort of hang out and be kids. And at 5:15 we start our workout, and then of course we work out till 7:15. We have dinner and everything that happens in between. But ultimately, it's a one-stop shop for kids after school. And when you think of the developing brain, you recognize how important environment is. And what we try to do is, or I should say, what we recognize we can't do is we can't take them all home.
Yeah.
And you know, we can't do that. So what we can do is limit the amount of time that they are home. So the fact that I can say with great confidence, considering that I taught in Philadelphia, in inner city, public school, 3,000 kids, 80% Latino. I mean, I was in the Badlands, literally that Port Richmond area. I can say with great confidence that the local schools are safe. And when I mean, I'll assess safe as nobody's getting stabbed and no one's getting, you know, God forbid, shot, or these big gang things aren't happening down here. So I can say with great confidence, you, to a kid, you need to be in school. And if that kid now goes to school from 7:30 to 2:45, and then they report to our facility at 3, and then they're here for open gym, they train at 5:15, they get, practice is over at 7:15, they eat dinner, they clean up. Some of our kids aren't leaving here till 9:30, and for those kids, I can say, go home, go to sleep, and we've literally limited their exposure to home. And we have kids who go home to parents that are on drugs. So, and we never want to undermine their parents. You never do that, right? We just want to show them another way and be there when they start to put pieces together, because they are.
Yep.
My son, 6 years old, he just asked my wife the other day, because I told him I grew up without a father. I didn't have a daddy growing up, but I've reconnected with my dad. So that's abuelo for him. So my son just says, Mom, Daddy didn't have a daddy, right? She goes, no, not growing up. But then isn't abuelo his daddy?
Right.
So my wife had to think quick on her feet and say, well, they just lived really far apart because he's not quite ready for that conversation.
For those conversations.
But kids will start to piece things up, and I think it's our job to lead them carefully and strategically, because I don't think my son's ready to hear
the full conversation.
But I also don't believe we should lie.
Yep.
Right? So, and I think that's what we do here. Where, some of these kids that have tough home lives and situations, they're going to start to realize that, man, mommy and daddy just aren't making good decisions, but that's okay.
Yeah.
We're going to teach our kids just a different way and ultimately to still love and respect their parents.
Yeah, that's really good, because I think it goes to show you, I like what you said. You said we're not trying to undermine anybody. You're just trying to show a different way. And I think you have to remember, like, some of these parents are great parents and they're doing the best they can, but they might be working 2-3 jobs, and the kid might come home from school and mom might still be at work, and otherwise they're just going to be home alone from 3 o'clock until bedtime, getting into trouble, right, with the other kids who live nearby or whatever it might be. And so trying to limit that exposure to the negative influences in the world, and even if it might not be necessarily at home, it could be neighbors, it could be a lot of things, right? Yeah. It could just be going home and being on Fortnite for 6 hours straight every night, that kind of stuff. And so giving those opportunities. So as you think about No Limits and, the needs, the challenges, it's obviously the type of thing where you can't just, I know people have asked me, how can we be involved? How can we be involved? And I try to explain to people, because you're working with kids and it's a delicate thing, you can't just have like 50 strangers show up once every 3 months to like help out the kids. These kids need stability. They need to see the same faces week after week after week after week. And so it isn't really the type of environment, correct me if I'm wrong, where it's like you can just stop by once a year and think you're going to have an impact with the kids. But what are some of the practical ways that people can get involved in to help out?
So we there's a few ways. I think immediately, if you really feel compelled to help, it's joining the meal train. So the meal train is a clever sort of system that we put together that allows us to feed our kids 5 days a week. So if you go to our website, nolimitsboxingacademy.org, on the top right, you'll see meal train. You can click there. There's a description about how important sit-down dinners are, and our kids are just not having sit-down dinners. I also am very anti-institution, so I'm not okay with cafeteria food. And it's the old, remember when we were younger, it was always that movie, like Problem Child, where they went to the cafeteria and they slopped.
Yeah.
You know, it just, that's not the type of food that we have here. I think it's incredibly important for our kids to have sit-down dinners that are made with love. And I think that's a thing. I really believe that dinner can be made with love and affection and care. And I think that hey, maybe it's the spirit.
No,
right?
I mean, I remember I went to a presentation by the prosecutor's office a couple of years ago with the church. They invited like all the faith things. And they were saying that like if you talk to your kids 10 minutes a day or 15 minutes a day, I forget what the number was, you're like 300% less likely to do heroin. I mean, it was, that kind of idea. And they were saying the obvious place to do it is over a meal. You know what I mean?
Everybody is so busy.
Yeah.
And so these sit-down dinners are incredibly important for our kids.
Yeah.
Because we're fighting a world that has been built and evolved through all these social constructs that really are just not natural. And there's major gaps. And it seems like the gaps are getting wider and wider and wider. So these sit-down dinners are and again, I think what's really important, Pastor, is that nothing we're doing here is brand new.
Yeah.
We're just going back in time a little bit and just trying to take a glimpse of what I would call the 80s and 90s and bring them back in here. But even before that, it was the 60s and the 70s, right? But yeah, just putting, families first, sit-down dinners, being around strong men, and feeding them. So yeah, to answer your question, if you want to help, you can jump on that meal train and offer a meal. All the information's on there. It's pretty simple and super user friendly because I am limited as far as my use of technology. So it's super easy. So if you wanted to make an immediate contribution to No Limits, you can jump on the meal train, and that's a great way to help.
Yeah, and how many kids are you guys feeding at night, roughly?
So we try to cook between 60 and 70 because, as we mentioned, we do have some kids who have incredible home situations, and they have this amazing meal that's prepped for their parents, by their parents, waiting for them. So we try to hit the number between 60 and 70. But ultimately, at any given day, there's 100 kids in the facility.
Yeah. Yeah. And, I know that some of you guys might say that's super intimidating. I don't know how to cook for that many people. There's instructions on the meal train where it tells you, hey, this equals so many crock pots of meatballs or whatever it might be. It's not as intimidating. No one's asking you to cook, salmon for 70 people. It's like, and you realize that it can be baked ziti, it can be chicken fingers, it can be a lot of different things. And another thing is, I think, I think Chrissy had said to me that it's about like the equivalent of like $250 if you guys were going to like have to buy the takeout, right? Something like that.
Yep.
And so even if you have a couple of friends and you say, hey, we're each going to chip in with a couple other families, we're each going to chip in $50 and we're going to pick one a month or, whatever it might be. Yeah. So don't think that you have to go home and you have to go cook filet mignon for 70 people. You know what I mean? That kind of idea. Though if you want to do that, let us know so we can be there. Yep. Okay, so meal train, what's another practical thing?
So, obviously financial donations because, we're moving and obviously, as we continue to evolve, we have bills to pay. So financial donations are important too, whether that's through just a donation that you guys, want to contribute to the gym or through a sponsorship. If you have businesses and want to support a good cause and also reap some benefits, because we are a registered 501c3, so you can help in that regard as well. Other ways is really, I would say, if you actually want to help on site, maybe you're a fitness person and you really could use some extra motivation to get back in the gym while helping kids. I think a great way to do that is go through Pastor Bill and
join some of the workouts.
Yeah, and join some of the workouts. Because again, the relationships are incredibly important to our kids, and consistency is incredibly important to them.
Yeah.
So just having a consistent presence on site could be a game changer.
Yep. Yeah, I love that. And I think those are when I was thinking about the three main things, those are the ones that came to my mind as well. Meal trains, donations. If you are someone who's into fitness and you say, I can come every Thursday or whatever it might be. But I do think that consistency, you can't come one time and think that it's going to be like, I finally was able to.
And other places, like if this was a soup kitchen, that's great. You go, you can help out, clean up. Just a different environment considering the nature of what we're working with. And that's incredibly important, the consistency.
Okay, that's great. And then I would just say you guys need to remember that whenever God is doing something powerful, that means that the enemy is also going to work to counteract it. And so I think it would be fantastic to see people really rally around No Limits in prayer, interceding for these kids, praying for these kids. Even if, let's say that your discipleship group is going to drop off a meal, don't just drop off the meal and go home. Drop off the meal and then go gather with your group and spend the next hour praying for No Limits. Because this is a spiritual war, and the enemy is working overtime for these kids. And I think that we need to remember that as well.
Yep, absolutely.
Josh, you have like a final thing that you want to say to people or anything?
No, I'm just curious to see what wasn't recorded on the podcast.
Yeah. Well, our mic dropped out halfway through, but I think we can pull it off it just might be a little bit different quality. I think we can pull the middle portion off the GoPro. But yeah, if you guys have any questions for Josh, you can feel free to grab them on a Sunday, or you can get in touch with me and I can pass it along. But Josh, thanks for sharing with us, man. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. Yep.
Yeah, talk to you soon, guys.
All right.
Bye-bye.